Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. I'm Avi Grossman, and this is Parsha Talk. We're very thankful to have Dr. Alan Brill, who is the Cooperman Ross Endowed Chair for Jewish Christian Studies at Seton Hall University, for joining us this evening. Hello, Dr. Brill.
Hi.
And for your historical reference, I think today is the first complete day of the Biden administration. We hope and pray that his and every American administration brings health, peace, happiness, and prosperity to the United States. And let's begin. This week's Parsha is Parashat Bo. I love Parashat Bo. My most recent book, for those of you who haven't seen it yet, Haggadah Pesach, is basically about Parashat Bo. Parashat Bo features the Exodus. And the Exodus is a seminal event in Jewish history. We like to talk about how many commandments in the Torah are based on the proposition that we should remember the Exodus. I think, of course, the Passover holiday and everything related to it is about remembering the Exodus, but we also have the Sabbath and Tefillin and Mezuzah and giving charity to the poor, and all sorts of other commandments are connected to this remembrance. And we see the birth of the Jewish people. The Jewish people, the people of Israel, were born into a civilized world. The mighty Egyptian empire existed. It was already the third kingdom, or what they call the new kingdom. The Babylonians and the Sumerians, the Greeks, they all existed at that time. The Chinese, I don't know how far along their civilization was. Perhaps Professor Brill can tell us at that point. But the world existed. And it's a world, we're not living in a vacuum. An Erev Rav, a mixed multitude of peoples, left Egypt with the Jewish people. And since then, many converts have joined us. Avram Avinu preached to many thousands of people, according to Maimonides. He also did not grow up in a vacuum. He lived in the Near East. He started off in what would be basically Iraq of today, but made his way to the Levant of what we call the Levant today. That's the land of Israel. And there's been a tricky relationship, because the Torah and the sages tell us that there's a lot we have to avoid. Among the Gentiles, there's rules of distancing. We can't eat their bread. We can't eat their wine. We can't eat their cheese. We can't intermarry with them, of course. But there's what to learn. I like to tell people that those who grew up, let's say, in the American modern Orthodoxy, are very much under the influence of the Rambam, Maimonides, and his teachings. And Maimonides himself draws tremendously from Aristotelian philosophy. So if you'd ask me, who is the ancient philosopher who's been the most influential in our modern Jewish outlook, I'd say perhaps Aristotle. Again, Professor Brill might correct me on that one or argue with me. That's totally fine. Professor Brill has been involved in interfaith, can I say dialogue or activity, perhaps?
Encounter.
Interfaith encounter. Very good. That's the word I should have used at the beginning. That's what we've been experiencing since the beginning, since Avram Avinu's time. I heard this is just a legend. I haven't seen confirmation. Most people I've heard it from most recently said that the Yirmiyahu Hanavi's encounter with Plato is actually made up. There's one of the early church fathers actually created that story. It's not true. Perhaps you could also enlighten us about that. But we wanted to know, Professor Brill, how did you get involved in this interfaith encounters?
So originally I got to it because one of my teachers, Rabbi Walter Wurzberger, was doing interfaith under the influence of Soloveitchik, and he had been the appointee since the 60s, and I was a close student of his, and he kind of brought me in as his life was getting toward the end, and so he started bringing me along as some sort of apprentice to interfaith. But then after 9/11, was a brand new era of interfaith, having very little to do with the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It became a new era that it's no longer, liberal rabbis talking to liberal ministers in America. It now became, very strong imams speaking to Catholic priests, speaking to Orthodox Jews. It became a very different sort of interfaith. And so the years 2002, 3, 4, 5, I was very involved in Christian and Jewish Muslim encounters, and that's how I got into it.
Okay, I remember meeting a Rav who was involved unfortunately, in vikuach, of the sort that the Ramban had to be involved in. I think, I would rather be among those who are engaged in the interfaith dialogue and reaching out, and less with the disputations and having to defend ourselves.
Well,
So,
we
yeah,
tend not to use the word dialogue, assumes that we're meeting as humans. It's a Martin Buber word. The Catholic
okay.
Church actually doesn't use the word dialogue. Orthodox Jews are not comfortable with it. We're not having a
Mhm.
dialogue about where we agree. We're having
Mhm.
an encounter and learning to work together and be exposed to each other.
So how much? Tell me how much percentage compare and contrast do we have there? Is it more contrast than compare?
I mean, everything is different. You've got to take each case.
Okay, fine. So and then Hinduism specifically, most of the sorry,
Yeah, you
I
go
was
on.
saying most of the encounters that Western Judaism has had has been with Christianity, and to a lesser extent, the philosophies that might not actually fall into these religious categories, but at least Western modes of philosophy, and then Islam. But here we're talking about Hinduism, or I think it's also I learned eventually that's too general a term. But perhaps you can enlighten us on that also. How Hinduism specifically?
So what happened was, because of my early interfaith and a paper I gave at a conference in 2004, I wound up putting out two books, Judaism and Other Religions. This is a version of my talk I gave in 2004, and then a
That's a whole
follow-up
talk.
Judaism. What?
That's a whole talk in one book.
Well, and
Yeah.
then a follow-up Judaism and World Religions, which then had all these things, statements from Rishonim and Achronim on Hinduism and Buddhism that you don't pay attention to from Sadhya, from elsewhere. And so I already put that on the map. But what really put it on the map was two different things. There was then the Jewish Hindu dialogue. The Rabbanut actually met with various Hindu leaders. In
Hmm.
2007, they met in India. 2008, they met in Yerushalayim. And 2009, they met in New York. So it started a trajectory that several of us started now saying, look, there's a lot of work to be done. Jewish Hindu encounter. Rabbi Daniel Sperber is still working on his halachic work, dealing with the Avodah Zarah questions. And I dealt with it from a much more cultural point of view. How do we translate one into the other, avoiding the actual, final psak question? But remember, this was 2009 in New York. And so, therefore, those years, I then put in an application, and there's a thing called a Fulbright grant. So, the US government, I'm a Fulbright senior scholar who was sent to India, but you're putting in the application like 2 years beforehand. And so, I won it for the 2013 year to go to India.
Okay.
And
So
besides that, there was also the very famous Shaitel controversy,
yeah, okay.
which some of us were called, what's the status of the hair? And the point is, we also discovered that most of the figures we spoke to, they said Buddhism, Hinduism, what's the difference? The only thing is that Evan Lemerkulis, meaning
Oh man. Yeah.
what?
I know
There was
that
no, there was, there was
there's a
no,
major difference.
and therefore now Dayanim regularly take shilas, and we all consult, and that's fine. But at that point, it was like completely a black hole that nobody knew how to explain anything. And
Mhm.
so that's how I got into the Hinduism, and then off I went to India.
Now, just for our viewers, I recall Professor Shapiro showed me something. Well, he showed it to everybody. Official psak from the Rabbanut in regards to the wigs that certain acts involving the hair that they're using that they got from the temples is not idolatrous, and that was very important, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So yeah, they had a psak like that. You could go find it online. It's also from about 13 years ago. So look for that. But many of us are still confused. What is Hinduism basically?
So first of all, Hinduism is not one religion.
Okay.
Basically, it's as if everything in the Indian subcontinent, Hindu just means Indus Valley, everything in the Indian subcontinent got counted as one religion because they looked similar. Originally, until the 17th century, there were separate religions of Vaishnavites and Shaivites and Shaktivism and Smarta. They were all separate religions, but under British colonialism, they looked similar enough that we're going to call all of them Hinduism.
Okay.
But they have very different rules, different worship styles, different representations, different holidays. And they're all cool with this sort of, we'll respect all of it.
Now, so when the Rabbanut, for example, gave its ruling, which religion was it specifically referencing?
So that's part of the issue. I'm a critic of some parts of the Rabbanut statements because they spoke to various leaders of ashrams, which were smarta versus specific version.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't go to other Brahmins who were much more theistic, Vaishnavites or Shaivites or others. And so they came thinking Hinduism was an object. And that was also part of it. Those of us who stepped back and said, wait a minute, you didn't really completely see who you were talking to.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you learn Hindi?
I learned enough to get by, meaning I did the sort of diplomat version that you listen to the tapes and you can speak enough to get by. But realize there are 19 official languages in India. Education and government is in English. But know that, for example, where the Seton Hall Temple comes from, the only languages spoken there are Tamil and Telugu. Hindi is only in northern India.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
There are 19 in Cochin, the language is Malayalam. It's like saying French, Italian, German, English. Yeah, there are 2-3 families, but they're not all the same language.
I figure it's what is it? 1 out of every 10 people in the world, or even perhaps a higher percentage. India is the 3rd most populous country in the world. And
no, it goes back and forth to China between 1st and 2nd.
Really? Okay. And then we have Indonesia, of course, maybe rounding out the top 3. And they call it the subcontinent for a reason. It might as well be its own world.
It's completely its own world.
Mm-hmm.
And as I tell people, any small break-off sect or ideology in India has more members than there are Jews in the world.
Yes.
Any little break-off idea.
They also have you pointed out in your article there are tens of thousands of students in a single university, much more than anything we have here in the Western world. And that used to be in it's talking about in person. It's not even talking about online classes. Yeah, we would never have such a thing here. Let me ask you also for our people's our viewers' reference. I know that Christ and Christianity are in the Talmud. And actually, there's a lot that's censored out, but you can find versions which put it back in there, or even parts where you could realize, oh, this is a censored text that's referenced there. Obviously, Islam is not in the Talmud because it postdates the Talmud, but Islam is. You could find it. I found it in a lot of Rishonim. They mention both of them, especially the Rambam. But I don't know. Are there, besides from the Mishnah, which mentions objects that come from India, like the Kohen Gadol's linen vestments, that comes from India, it says. But is there any reference to Indian religions? Sorry for the general use, but is there any reference to their religions in the Talmud?
Not in the Talmud.
Okay.
There will be to the country India, but you will find the first of as a religion will be Sadya Gaon, who will quote the Brahmins. If you have the unedited version of Emunot Videot, not the little selections, you see he's taking on all of it because in his 10th century Baghdad, there were these interfaith encounters of Christians, Muslims, Jews, atheists, Buddhists, Hindus, all knowing each other's works. And so therefore the full version of Sadya will respond to the philosophies of the Brahmins. Most specifically, the fact that they don't have creation. And so Sadya will refute that in Emunot Videot in the name of the Brahmins.
When you say they don't have creation, you mean they believe in a world that existed infinitely beforehand, right?
Right.
Okay, and that's a philosophical idea that's not unique to the East. We have it also in the Western world. In the Greek tradition, there was such a claim. Yeah.
You'll find quotes in Ibn Ezra, certainly Mefarshei Ibn Ezra. You will find the Yoga Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita were translated into Arabic and then into Judeo-Arabic. They're ascribed to the Ibn Ezra, but a Rishonic library had Yoga Sutras, Bhagavad Gita, and other such things available, and we find quotes.
Okay.
Um, even the Ben HaMelech the Nazir is a version of the Buddha tale.
Hmm.
You will then find it in the Age of Exploration. It picks up again, famously with Rav Menashe ben Israel in Amsterdam in the age of the East India Company. And he's the one who takes the old midrash about the gifts to the Pelagshim of Avraham and says they were the Eastern religions, meaning originally from Sefer Yovlot and Midrash and Rashi, the gifts to the East were kishuf, or magic, and he's the one who gives it a positive spin and says, no, it's really a gift from God. And that's where that one got started. And then since that point on, you've got actually a lot of quotes and discussions of various points since 16th to the 20th century.
Okay. Now, what do you think? What do you want Jews to know about this? Let's say an Amoritz like myself who has had no encounter with Hinduism or anybody preaching Hinduism or even any Hindus except for a few Indian guys with whom I went to college but didn't talk any religion to me. What should I know?
So you should know that almost anything you will find about Hinduism in any book you used in college, on the internet, out there is incorrect.
Oh, okay.
Most things that are out there are about ancient Hinduism, and that's the biggest thing to understand. They're not giving horse sacrifices the way, say, we're not giving sacrifices. You can't open up Yechezkel and say all Jews are waiting to see the Kisei HaKavod or lying there on the floor eating a scroll. Everything we teach about Hinduism in the West is about an ancient book and having very little to do with it than 2,500 years after those ancient books. That's so you can't ever quote a Veda. You can't ever quote, oh, look at the picture that's on my cover. Those are museum pieces. Those are not really used in worship. Almost everything we have as our stereotypes are not really true. So when I actually start my book, hold on, I might hold it up and do the advertisement here. Okay, it's coming out in paperback in June or July. It was supposed to be out, but COVID held it up. Yeah. I start the book basically saying, the assumption is, oh, Jews give sacrifices because the only thing they know about Judaism is Leviticus.
Okay.
And then I say, no, Jews do not give sacrifices anymore. And they say, oh, your 19th century reformers must have gotten rid of them. That's the level that Jews understand Hinduism, or most Westerners understand Hinduism. If you go to the Hindus that live here in New Jersey, they are, their temples all have a social hall with, food after the service and youth groups and Sunday school and men's club and sisterhood, and they all claim to be monotheists. And whatever you see in your books has long since been weeded out. That's the biggest thing, is that almost nothing you're going to see is actually what their religion is.
So my Judaism does not have a sacrificial ritual. They're not going to come to the synagogue I attended this morning and see us slaughter a lamb and throw its blood on an altar. And we didn't do that again in the afternoon. However, my Judaism, I guess I'm just speaking for myself also, I'm highly idealistic and optimistic. I'm hoping that tomorrow morning we'll make up for that and actually have a functioning temple and go back to the sacrificial service. Is there any mushal for that or a nimshal for that in the Indian religion?
There is some groups, but not for most, because these are not modern changes. The idea of having one single theism or not having the sacrifice already go back to the Upanishads from the time of Chazal, meaning their very structure is already similar to ours, parim svatenu, meaning our words count in place of the sacrifice. The setup of the structure,
is
already, meaning, yes, there are people who want to go back, and there are even anthropologists who have paid some groups to actually reenact the ancient rituals.
Okay.
And there's even a film of it, but that's not actually, nobody's getting up and assuming it's going to happen too quickly.
Okay. So I was always wondering, there's the joke about the fellow who found out that he was not actually Jewish. His mother's conversion was wasn't recognized or wasn't done in right. And then he realized that he himself has to convert to Judaism. So he tried to do some Averos at the time. And I always wondered, one of the things that I've seen that Jews don't do is they don't try to recreate the incense that was in the temple. And incense isn't part of our culture, and this isn't the type of Avera you see people do. There are unfortunately Jews who violate Shabbos and other things, but you don't see them go and say, "Okay, I want to make some Ketores and see what that smelled like." Has there been any Gentiles who thought, "Hey, I want to use the recipe that's described in Exodus and in the Mishnah and in the Brightot"?
Lots of Christian groups do things like that.
Yes. But
Yeah.
do you know of anybody who's done incenses similar? Have you smelled a thing like that? Have you been with a group that perhaps?
Well, the only place you would smell it is during a church service, which I'm not going in. But the point is that there are even America. There are all sorts of, meaning once again, understand that in America, the biggest buyer of shofrot and mezuzot are Christian evangelicals.
And matzah. I found this also. Matzah also.
And they are trying to recreate all sorts of things. There are at least 4 kotels in America.
Oh, okay. I guess I have to get out more. I have to get to America and
you
see.
You don't have to get out more, but it's just not.
So let me ask you something that I heard from an Israeli Rav here. How much is reincarnation a part of the Hindu religions?
Okay, so that's one of the perfect examples. I start my discussion of that in my book with quoting Rav Menashe ben Israel in his where he basically says that a Jew is chayav to believe in reincarnation, and it's one of the yesodot of Judaism. If you don't believe it, you're not believing the emunot. And then in contrast, showing you that most 21st century Hindus basically say we know very little about the world to come. We just know that we're going to be paid back for our good deeds and we want to lead a good life. And therefore we know very little about it. So a lot of the textbooks you're going to read in America make reincarnation, which is in the classic texts. Imagine if we had reincarnation discussed in Devarim, and then we had a Parak Mishnayot on it. But it's not a big part of their consciousness. They basically, at this point, assume very much, we don't know about it. We can't know about it. It's not the current approach. What counts as the purification of the soul is don't make the other one exotic and you very different.
Now, I study in a kollel where every morning, basically, they're learning books from the Ari, and they basically they hold of reincarnation also, and they've told me similar that if you do not believe in that, then you're denying our traditions, and it's tantamount to denying Moses himself. Yet, I also have one of the Rabbanim here has claimed that Litvaks, for example, don't talk much about reincarnation. It's not on their Jewish radar. And then some who even have the guts say, yes, it's not even a Jewish idea. Perhaps we don't even hold such a thing. And then one of the gutsiest rabbis, who already is doesn't hold of the Zohar and other things, said that reincarnation is actually something that we got from the East. That's Jews picked it up from the encounter with Hinduism. What do you say to that proposition?
So in general, that's the same breakdown you're going to find in India. I mean, there was a certain exotic point 100 years ago. We presented Hinduism that they have reincarnation rather than Christian. After life, that was the dichotomy. But the exact spectrum is that Hindu Litvaks don't talk about it at all.
Okay.
Modern ones here in New Jersey, really, it's not part of their thinking. But those who study some of the classic works, it's a big part of their thinking. And that is the spectrum. I mean, I actually taught in the Hindu University. Wow. And my co-faculty were all incredible Litvaks. And they were all the people who would get up to pray at 5 a.m. and go to the Ganges and be very strict in all ritual. But if you ever said something like reincarnation or God, and they would just say, who can prove it? Like there was this incredible skeptical rationalism as Litvaks that they kept every law stringently, my co-faculty. But they weren't going to go to any of those directions.
Okay. Do you think that these Litvak Hindus would be classified as proper Noahides?
Would they? Yes. No question about it. The two things that the ones that play roles others in other countries is one. I'm very strong that Hinduism does have one God, and as Steinsaltz said, for a Gentile, they're as close to monotheism, and if we include Christians, then Hinduism is certainly are to be included in that. They don't do Ever Minachai, which we have in some Far Eastern countries, and they're completely, very, very, very moral with Yirat Shamayim. So I have no problem in that.
When you say moral, you mean they hold to the forbidden relations? They hold of our code or something?
They hold to forbidden relations. They hold, all of the mitzvot sichliot in a very strict code is part of who they are, and very strong in Haknasat Orchim and Staka and those things.
There's a phenomenon nowadays of Israeli young adults heading off to India and perhaps also the East, Thailand, places like that. I know in Thailand they're Buddhists. You'll confirm that. In India, of course, it's different religions. What is the draw? Why are they going there?
So 40,000 a year go.
Wow.
Most of them go because it's a time after army. It's a time to learn how to play instruments and learn about yoga, meditation, massage. But they're living in very much their Israeli bubble. Most of them live in what's called the Derech HaChumus. They live on the Chumash Trail, on these little Israeli enclaves. They have local restaurants that make them Israeli food. And I spoke to them. Most of them have very little interest in the indigenous religion. Most of them say they like the Sikh temple in Amritsar. And then I tell them that's not Hindu. And they go, oh. But other than that, they're there for all sorts of cultural reasons. However, in the last 15, 20 years, you now have also the spiritual seekers. You have the things like from Yaakov Nagain, who went, and all the Mechanchim. I mean, you may have seen the book Mehodu V'Ad Khan of all these Mechanchim who went. And there is a realm of these graduates who are going there to learn about the Eastern approaches of a greater meditative approach, a greater daily spirituality, and then bringing it back within their own religious lives here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, let me ask.
But that's not the majority. That's not the majority.
Okay. Those of us on this side, now I got to think here. They want to know. You mentioned that you have these Litvak Hindus who are going to dunk in the Ganges every morning. They go to prayer, and then they're sort of they have a question. They're a little bit agnostic. You said they don't about God.
They're not agnostic. The point is that there's So in Hinduism, there are what's called 6 philosophies, 6 darshana, and one of them, and that's the quote unquote the tradition, the scholastic tradition. One of them is called Nyaya, which is our equivalent of medieval thought, and that's the cosmological argument for God, the teleological argument for God, like we find in Sadhya and Maimonides and Ralbag. That's Nyaya. Number 2 is Mimamsa. That's how you interpret legal texts. And Mimamsa is interesting because it's got all of our, Yud Gimel Midot Shatorah Nidreshet Behemoths, how you interpret the text completely as a legal function. And therefore, the Mimamsa texts assume that any intentionality is only about that you are doing the act as an obligation. There is no spirituality in it. And so most of my colleagues were the Mimamsa school. They were strict in law. There's even an article in one of the law journals in America comparing Rav Soloveitchik to the Mimamsa school.
Okay, well, yeah, I would do that.
And that was my colleagues. What people are then going to India for is what's either called the yogic school, which is how you get a mind control in order to focus. I mean, yoga doesn't mean the physical postures, but it's basically what we call the meditation, the various kavanot. And then there's also various forms of Vedanta, which is then you try to understand how God is filling everything and behind everything, that there's oneness to reality. So you study all of them when you study to be an educated Hindu. But my colleagues were out of their way Litvaks. That all accounts is that you were doing it correctly.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Not that they were denying anything. There was a level of like making fun of the spirituality on some level.
So you're using our English word God. I know that I could speak to another Jew, or let's say anybody in the West, Christians and Muslims included. They know what I'm referring to. God, I should say. Who, what? We don't even know if he's a who or what, but they know what we're referring to. Does that mean the same thing in India?
So for the majority of India, it means the same thing. For the 96% of Vaishnava Shaivite followers who believe in a theistic, that the God will reward you for your good deeds and all that, they understand. There will be some of the Vedanta philosophies, especially Advaita Vedanta, that was really attractive to the English transcendentalists like Emerson, that have a cosmic God that's not our God. They will argue against it, but the majority of Hindus will. There's separate words in Sanskrit for how you refer to divinity, meaning the word para-Brahman is the word for the Ein Sof, the infinite that you don't really relate to. Ishwara is your personal God, and that would be translated as God. And the word diva, know that medieval Hebrew and Arabic translated diva not as gods, but as angels. Christians went out of their way to translate diva as gods to say, look, they are worshiping as polytheists, and therefore they have so many gods. When Muslims and Jews are already from the Rishonic time already translated as angels, and that don't confuse everything with the one God you're worshiping behind everything.
Okay. I'd like to point out to our viewers that, by the way, even in classical Hebrew, sometimes angels, what we know as angels, are referred to as B'nai Elohim, or sometimes just Elim or Elohim. And that's, I could say that, you pronounce the hey, because it's not referring to the God himself. It's referring to his emissaries that he created.
So they certainly know, they certainly have it built into their language, and certainly modern language, it's there already.
Okay, very interesting. We have a question from one of the viewers here. I was going to ask my own questions, but I like this one. So I asked you about if our sages mentioned Hinduism at all, but then you mentioned no. But it already starts in the Goanim. Is Judaism known in Hindu teachings? Do they have any references to us in their classical texts?
No, they do not.
Wow, why not?
Why not? Because the question is, what do you call a classical text? Meaning, that for one thing, most in India, they couldn't tell the difference between Judaism and Christianity. Okay. Even to this day, they've got a very hard time.
You can't tell the difference. Okay.
I mean, where it seems here's the point, is where Judaism, Protestantism, Catholicism, Islam seem very different to us. They blur the lines in a way that we blur in Indian religions.
Now, I'd like to give a thought based on what you said. This is Parsha. You brought the interpretation that when Avram Avinu sent away his B'nai Pilagshim, a reference to the sons of Keturah, his third wife, there was Midyan, Midan, Yishbak, Shuach, Zimran, and Yokshan, all of them. Sorry, I said out of order. It's actually Telo, Zimran, Yokshan, Midan, Midyan, Yishbak, and Shuach, and then it has the 5 sons of Midyan. It's very interesting to know. Before we get back to this week, Moshe Rabbeinu has one of his first chidushim. What was that? Yaakov Avinu had told his children and his grandchildren, and Yosef had repeated this before his death, that eventually God will redeem his people and bring them back to the land of their fathers. Yet Moshe Rabbeinu's new plan is, Moshe Rabbeinu himself went to the land of Midian, which, if this interpretation is correct, Midian is, I guess, a proto-Hindu religion or an Eastern religion. Moshe Rabbeinu is with the Kohen Midian finds God's holy mountain. That's what it says. He already got to Har Sinai well before the Exodus. They call it the mountain of God. The Targum says it's the mountain of God because God will reveal himself there. And Moshe Rabbeinu basically tells the Israelites, before we can go back to the promised land as promised, where the land is promised and also the return has been promised, we're going to take a major detour. We're going to go to nearby the land of Midian, and there God is going to renew his covenant with us and even give us a brand new religion, different from that which our fathers recognized, something unrecognizable that is going to change the world. And perhaps that's also a relevant idea for this week. Yeah. Okay. So here's some questions. Let's compare this. The Hindus have laws of ritual purity, correct?
Yes.
Yes. And you said that they go to the Ganges. Do they have other? Do they consider other things impure like we consider impure? Major forms of impurity.
They have the entire list of Tuma Yotzei Migufo. There's only so many. They have the entire every one of them, and the exact same list is in Hinduism.
Okay.
And that's an important point to realize, that they're very worried about all the same list, but they're much more machmir on saliva.
Interesting. Okay. By the way, saliva is on the list. We talk about zav.
But they make it much more machmir. That's why you don't see anyone who is religious sharing food from each other's plates.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the ways to quickly tell how pious somebody is.
Okay. So yeah, the Kohanim have to keep that. There's a classic case. The Gemara mentions one of the Kohanim and Gedolim got contaminated right before Yom Kippur because he was visiting a dignitary, was visiting Jerusalem, an Arab king, and just a drop of spittle got on the Kohen Gadol, contaminating him.
So those who are strict worry about that quite a bit.
Okay.
And there's many rules of that are out there.
Okay. Now, dietary laws. Most of us are familiar with a lot of Indians are vegetarians. They will not eat animals at all. And then I learned by reading your article here, or the article about you, that no, actually, not all Indians are vegetarians or vegans. There are actually quite a few who do eat meat. Do they have other dietary laws, and why is it that they've started eating meat if it's such a verboten?
So only usually the higher caste will tend to be vegetarian.
Okay.
The higher castes.
Okay, fine. I would have thought the other way around. Like the ones who are higher, they tend to eat meat, and the lower castes don't eat meat.
No, because the lower castes are seen as needing it for the work, because they do physical work.
Okay.
There's a strangeness that because they treated me as a Brahmin, as a higher caste, they treated me as clergy, I couldn't even pull my own chair out or erase my own blackboard.
Okay, wow.
There's a level. They also used to kiss the corner of my garment. It was...
How is it that they knew to treat you as a clerical person? Did you introduce yourself as rabbi, or is it because you're a college professor?
One, I was introduced that way, but even in the street, you follow. Besides, I always wore a kippah.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I was not wearing a baseball cap or anything, but also there's certain ways. Remember, you're in a hot country and all that. There's a certain sniut dress of long sleeves and long pants and having your head covered. And I don't think the people, every tuk-tuk driver knew whether I was Muslim or Farsi or what religion I was, but they knew that from a head covering and this look, I was something of a higher caste.
Really interesting. With all due respect, you don't wear the beard of the Orthodox rabbi,
right?
Okay, but they figure also already you had a suit and tie or the hat.
No, it was just whatever it was. It was enough. It was enough formal that it looked to them different. I mean, probably they thought I was some Muslim group because Muslims all have head coverings and mustaches, and it didn't really matter though.
Fine.
The exactitude wasn't the issue, but the fact that I was also a teacher, because also 90% of the professors are Brahmins.
Okay, interesting. 90% of the professors. So they assume if you're already a professor there, you got that. Okay. Did the professors have a particular dress? Those who are not Brahmins or any other form of clergy, is there a specific dress that they have?
You would tend to be, as when you're acting in that role, you tend to be more conservative in your dress. You're not dressing. You would never dress as a day laborer. It was a scandal, like back in the 1960s, the first time you had college students wearing T-shirt and blue jeans. and that was seen as scandalous
Yes.
because once you're already a university man,
You have to.
you would be wearing a tie. You wouldn't be dressing in a t-shirt like a laborer.
Mhm.
So things have
So
changed, but this is still a much more formal in the areas that I was.
when you and I attend synagogue, we attend the same synagogue as the layman. The we know that the Rav sits all the way in front, and everybody else fills the rest of the synagogue, and we all daven together. But there is the caste system you mentioned in India. How is public and private prayer done? Are they also divided by caste, or do they gather in
So
one
big,
place for that?
big temples are for obviously big temples are for everyone,
Okay.
but the Brahmins are the only ones who can perform the service as a pujari. They can only
Oh,
ones who can do it. Other castes cannot perform the service or lead the service or do rituals in public.
wow. Okay.
Two, the higher castes don't do any of the street festivals. So a lot of what we see as the colorful street festivals are really either really secular, or they're only done for tourism, or they're done by lower castes.
Mhm.
Meaning celebrations of Holi, throwing paint and all that is not a real rich. It's not a ritual. It's like 4th of July fireworks. It's not. It's not the real service. The upper caste don't even go into town for these things because, the same way, whatever it is, you may have been told in yeshiva, you don't go in for whatever event is going on in town to sit and learn.
Mm.
They've got that same attitude toward things going on in town.
My father says to add the word lahavdil before I say the next line. This reminds me of the modern observance of Purim. If you know, on Purim there is what the Talmud prescribes, and you notice rabbi types, they wear their formal clothing on Purim, but it's more of a balabatish thing to masquerade, groggers and things like that. That's more of the people, and that's not specifically a religious act.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
exactly what you're going to see all over.
Okay. Now, I used to like to study scripture, and then I remember telling someone we have the scripture that's we say that's the Bible, the Tanakh, but then it sort of continues because our sacred library continues with the Mishnah and the Talmud, and as you can see, well, on that side of me and on that side, the orange directly behind me, we have a whole host of sacred literature that has evolved out of those. What do they have in India?
So they actually have much more, even on legal stuff, even on halachic issues, meaning their sacred scripture after the Ved is the Upanishads.
Hmm.
But really, what people learn are a whole series of books that have not been almost none translated into English, called the Agamic literature. The
Okay.
Agamic literature tells you how the temple service works, how all ritual works, how to build a temple, laws of purity, and gives very specifics. And that's really what every temple follows. There are also the Dharma Sutras and Dharma Shastras of legal codes, which would be things like marriage, divorce, property, probate, those things. And they have thousands of commentaries on all of that.
Well,
And certainly nobody would ever understand a text outside of its commentaries.
but do they also believe that as an ideal that library should be open to even the layman, and that the laymen have a responsibility to be studying those things, familiarize themselves, like we have the concept of Talmud Torah?
So on this, I'm going to say it's not as simple as you make it,
Hmm.
because, for example, in Western European Orthodoxy, for example, the world of Rav Hirsch, you did not give laity halacha books. You gave people books on Tanakh and Pirkei Avot and how to, but you didn't make them do Gemara or poskim on the. They didn't study. Balabatim did not do halacha,
Hmm.
and so it's not. I'm going to problematicize it on that side, and so it works the same thing here. Is most of the people know what they know through the various popularizations, scripture that's got already commentary. They all interpret everything as being ethical, moral, rather than whatever you're going to find in some college textbook about some ancient metaphysics. They're going to see the moral of every story as how you can be nice to your neighbor and to fight your evil inclination and other such things.
Hmm. Very interesting. Now, we mentioned God already. Do they consider God the creator of everything, correct?
No, that's the point. There's no creation.
Oh, there's no creator. Okay, so is that problematic for us? Do we say that when we would want, let's say, Noahides to believe in a creator and not curse him, etc., or not believe in other creators, not other gods, does that imply also that it must be a creation, or we could let that slide?
I mean, you can read Sadya. Sadya clearly says it's wrong, it's incorrect, but it certainly it doesn't affect those who are miyachadim. It's not it's an attribute, not part of the very essence.
Okay. So what about the afterlife? What do they have with regards to that, if any?
They have dozens of different views of afterlives. They've got the technical one of everything is going to be some sort of mida keneged mida. And most average people in the street will just believe that God will give you the schar and onesh for what you did in this world. On the other hand, they've got books that look like our Masechet Gehenim and our Ma'aver Yavok with all sorts of visions of the afterlife, which we don't tend to emphasize in our yeshiva educations anymore.
Yeah. Did we emphasize them?
What?
Did we ever emphasize them?
Italian Renaissance, we actually have Ma'aver Yavok and Naftali Katz's books on death were actually.
Yeah. Okay. Fine.
Yeah. And that's why there were so many Kitsurim that came out of.
Well, though I think Italian. I don't have any Italian the origins in me. Okay, fine.
No, but even that whole era of that includes Poland and Germany. Yes. Anyone who is, and what was I saying? And then again, you've got a lot of the modern ashrams who are basically saying, the world to come and afterlife is all about what you achieve in your perfection here in this world based on your own spiritual perfection. You've got a gamut of opinions.
Our custom already for a few hundred years is that we close the public prayer service with the elena l'shabeach, which is taken from the high holiday prayers. We have this concept of l'taken olam b'malchut Shaddai. We hope that one day all mankind come to see what we believe to be the truth, our God, and they'll all they'll join with us. Do the Hindus have such a concept of a messianic utopian ideal of universality? And
they assume that everyone's going to come to the universal.
Yeah. Is it more like our universal or like their universal, or will be somewhere in the middle?
Somewhere. I mean, that's the point. There's dozens of their versions, and I've read more than one version of what Elenu means.
Okay.
So we have to take it from there, meaning the Arizal's version is not going to be the version in my Hirsch Sidur.
Okay. I'm thinking, let's say, Rav Sadia Gaon's version, perhaps. We have his sitter. Actually, I have I'd have to get up and I have it. I was looking at his sitter before, but I can't take it out here. Well, what do you think of Rav Sadia Gaon's version, or are you familiar with it?
So the question with that version is that the entire Elena is made up of psukim from Tanakh. And so there's very little of what it means in the later context within the tefillah itself.
Okay.
Ashkenaz had a minhag of actually putting in what it meant. Meaning, like, you have these old Ashkenazi Sidurim from the 11th, 12th, 13th century that actually cursed Christianity. And then we want the uprooting of Christianity. The Mediterranean tradition has nothing like that, and since it's made up of entirely psukim of Zechariah and elsewhere, then you're going back to what their Perushim on Tanakh are, and it's not the same. It's not anywhere near like the Ashkenaz.
Okay. Also, I'd like to point out that unfortunately, Ashkenazic Jewry over the course of history didn't exactly have the best experience with the Christians. The Christians were basically massacring them, forcing them to convert, expelling them. I don't know of any history of anti-Semitism in India, or any anti-Semitism. Perhaps you can that.
No anti-Semitism for 3,000 years. Jews have been going there since the time of Shlomo. There are Tamil words within Shashirim. I mean, the spices, the animals.
Yes. As a matter of fact, bringing back the idea of the Ketores and the anointing oil, it's been pointed out by Rav Kapach and Rav Makbili. We have the Rama behind here that a lot of the ancient spices had to have come from India. There was no other way to obtain them.
Yeah, so there was a contact with civilization. We got along very well there. We got along well because they assume everybody's got their own quote unquote caste, their own dharma.
Yeah.
I was Dharma Yahudi, and therefore everybody's got their place in the universe. And therefore we had our place in the universe because they assume everybody's got their own little place, and therefore there was never a need for anti-Semitism.
Okay.
You know? And we went there until the India-Pakistan war. There was never any fear living there.
Interesting. So we have two more questions here. One is that we have a concept in Judaism of chosenness, that we are the chosen people, whatever that means. By the way, I'm not going to go into that now. That could be a whole 6-month course in what that concept means. We have chosen places. And even among the chosen people, we have certain people who were chosen. We have the Levites and Kohanim, the Davidic line. We have Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. Is that concept or some sort of not an equivalent, but a parallel concept existent there in India?
So starting at the basic, they have a lot of chosen places. The idea of pilgrimage and chosen places is very important for them.
Okay.
But as the second president of India, Ramakrishnan, said, and he quoted the Bible, when Yeravam put up idols in Dan and Beit El, he was condemned. Ramakrishnan said, India is a big country. We want as many temples as we can. And they're all holy. And there's a whole sense of a pilgrimage cycle in which people visit the many, many holy cities. And they believe those cities are holy and chosen by God and have all sorts of special merits.
Okay.
They assume there are special festivals. Like right now, we're in the middle of the Kumbh, which is going on in Harawar. And Harawar translated into Hebrew would be Beit El.
Okay.
Meaning a holy city. And they certainly believe Brahmins are the chosen ones. So, they're very much into those things.
So, but they don't have, like, let's say, a chosen line, like a patrilineal line of descent that's been chosen.
For the Brahmins, they're very much into your descent.
It's patrilineal. Okay, very interesting.
I can tell from a last name a lot about a person.
Okay.
Because all the last names are indicative of who you are and where you fit into the universe.
So it's encoded also, I guess, caste is also included in that.
Very much right. So therefore, you would generally go in the not 21st century, but certainly 100 years ago and before, you went into a profession of some family member. It was really, that was the way it worked.
So we have another question from a viewer here. He mentions an Aguri sect. He says they practice forms of cannibalism, and I can't read this out loud here. I don't want to do that. What is that? Is that viewed as legitimate by the rest of Hinduism?
Not by the people you're going to come into contact with.
Okay.
Meaning that is, like I said, every deviant is going to have more members than there are Jews. That is not a sect. It's not a denomination. There are those people who take a vow, but not just there are those who are like the ascetic Nazir vows. They're taking a vow to completely turn everything to a certain form of matir isurim. So if everybody else worries about Tuma and Tahara, they violate it. Everybody worries about Hamet, they violate it. They are a specific group that attempts to live beyond all categories. Some of them are, whatever reason somebody will choose to do that, unfortunately, they're very colorful because they paint their body in human ashes. TV crews love to take pictures of them.
Yes.
Your average person that you're going to meet is going to go, don't bother me with that. It's there, and it's really not something. It's not something the mainstream really wants to pay attention, but they're there. And a lot of them, like I said, the reason somebody will choose that, there's always a story behind it.
Fine. That's I guess I haven't met some, but they're the kinds that are most visible. You just look online and you see that there's I guess the ones who are the most unusual are get the loudest and get the most attention by us Westerners, even if they're not necessarily representative of what's going on. Very interesting. That's a good one. I think we've exhausted both our questions. No, we haven't exhausted the questions. We have a whole number of things here that I was actually thinking about, but we're sort of running out of time now.
I want to add one more thing because we're only dealing India here. Know that Hinduism in Indonesia grew up entirely in a Muslim country.
Mm-hmm.
So in Indonesia, Buddhists, Hindus, Confucians, Taoists all proclaim that they're monotheistic. They proclaim they've got a prophet who gave them scripture, and they all believe in rewards.
Mm-hmm.
Understand that if you went to Indonesia, all Buddhists and Hindus, by definition, claiming they have God and prophecy and reward and punishment without any ambiguity.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Now, we have to plug your books now. You held up 2 books before. The Rabbi on the Ganges, what is it?
Rabbi on the Ganges, the paperback is coming out in June or so.
Okay.
This is my textbook that actually now I get actually royalties from it. Gets used in courses, Judaism and other religions.
Okay. So where can we get both of those?
So here's the story. The Judaism and Other Religions was a $25 paperback when it came out. My publisher was bought by a scientific publishing company and then raised all the prices 4 times. However, they have twice a year sales where they offer it for $15.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I have no other better way to say it because don't spend $100 on a paperback, but that's just what happened. And that's how it got assigned to courses because it was cheap when it came out. And the Rabbi on the Ganges will be out in June as a regular inexpensive paperback on Amazon.
Oh, just on Amazon. Okay, so they just have to search on Amazon for Dr. Alan Brill or Professor Brill, and they find it there.
Yes.
Okay. I'd also like to remind our viewers, don't forget, check out our website for information about how to order your copy of Haggadah HaPesach. God willing, in a few weeks, we'll have the English edition also available. If you don't know what that is, check our back videos, and we're going to be putting up something new also to introduce the new English edition. Don't forget, if you want to attend this year's Korban Pesach, which no one has done, no living person has done yet, God willing, you'll need a copy of Haggadah Pesach so you know what to do. We'll also like to take this time to thank Dr. Brill for joining us tonight. He's been very gracious, made us very happy, and actually enlightened us. And I'm sorry we didn't get to finish everything we needed to cover tonight. But God willing, we'll check out that book and start to enlighten ourselves even more. And thank you very much. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Continue sending in your questions or comments. And have a Shabbat Shalom.